Before I introduce our presenter, as always, I'll mention that Senior Planet, we seek out subject matter experts in these fields for these programs. So many of those have used their expertise in the for-profit sector. We're thrilled to have Bre here today. She has a ton of fantastic information to share. And just want to note that as a nonprofit, Oats and Senior Planet is not specifically endorsing any particular platforms or products. We're bringing her here to speak on her expertise. And so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce you all to Bre Clark, or maybe reintroduce you. She may be a familiar face to some. Bre is a death doula offering her services in Nashville, Tennessee through her practice Eclipse into Harmony. Bre helps people navigate the complexities of death by offering end-of-life planning and direct support to those at the end of their life. In times of profound need, she provides time, education, and guidance to those caring for their dying loved ones throughout the dying process and afterward. Bre plans unique life celebrations and memorials, offers home funeral guidance, and assists with wrapping up affairs. She looks familiar to you. That's because she is a former Oats and Senior Planet employee, so we're particularly excited to bring her back here today. She brings over a decade of experience leading and coordinating programs just like this one. She's run a lot of initiatives and done a bunch of advocacy for older adults, and she embodies a passionate commitment as an aging optimist and an older person in training. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Bre.
Wonderful. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Deirdre. That was great. So I'm so pleased to be here today, and I'd like to take a moment to bring us all into this space with a guided meditation. I promise it'll be quick. So this time, if you would like, you can close your eyes or allow your eyes to kind of become unfocused. I'm also going to share this nice little image on your screen if you need something to look at. Okay. So with that, I'd like for you to bring to mind a place that is very peaceful, very calm to you personally. Either one that you've been to or one you would like to go to. Often people will pick a place in nature. So somewhere that feels settling and calming. And so when this place is clear in your mind's eye, I'd like for you to fire up your 5 senses. And in your mind's eye, I want you to look around this place and see the landscape. See the colors, the textures. Notice, is the sun shining? Is it shady? Become aware of what you would see as you look around. Next, I'd like you to bring awareness to the sounds you would hear. The sounds that are close up and the sounds that you would hear at a distance. Take in any scents and smells that are in this calming place. Next, I'd like you to take a moment and imagine what this place would feel like on your skin. Are you in the sunlight? Shade? Is it warm or humid? Or maybe it's cool and brisk? Is it windy? So just take a moment to imagine what it would feel like to be in your calm place. And now I'd like you to take just one more moment to absorb anything else that feels particularly calming and soothing. And we'll close with 3 inhales and exhales together. You can join me if you want. We're going to inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. One more time. Inhale and exhale. All right. So for those new to the term, Deirdre mentioned that I'm a death doula, and this is also known as an end-of-life doula. Doulas offer non-medical holistic support and comfort to the dying person and often their circle of care. And this may include education and guidance, as well as emotional, spiritual, and practical care. Often, though, we do find ourselves offering community education, very similar to what I'm doing today. And this is for people no matter their health status. This is helping people consider or plan for their own end of life. So today I'm going to be talking about reflecting on your values. And the way I'm positioning this is that it's ideal to do before you engage in creating or perhaps adjusting your advanced care planning. I'm going to discuss how to determine what it is that matters to you most by reflecting on what it is that you enjoy about life. Often when we think about end-of-life care, it evokes a lot of uncomfortable feelings. It's not surprising to any of us. And so what I find is that by taking a step back and really considering what it is that you enjoy in your day-to-day life, these are things that can help you gain some more clarity on what it is that you care about. And so I'd like to begin with this question. Take a moment and think about your answer. And if you will indulge me, share it in the chat. What activities or experiences of the senses bring you the most fulfillment and satisfaction? It's kind of a big question. You probably don't think about it often. So take a moment and think about your answer. What activities or experiences of the senses bring you the most fulfillment and satisfaction? I'll leave it up here for a second and give people a chance to answer.
Bree, I think we will need to adjust the chat in a second so folks can chat with everyone, but maybe I'll read some out loud that I'm seeing come in here, which is music, sitting outdoors in the shade in a cool breeze, walk on the beach, exercises, cooking and travel, dance, gardening, travel, wine, lots of tastes and food, lots of travel, the touch of a loved one, like getting a hug, making art, sitting in the yard, scuba diving, lots coming in. So we'll adjust that setting in just a second so you can see more.
That's great. Thanks, Deirdre. I saw someone said scuba diving. I love that. A lot of nature, a lot of pets, family, art, music. Wonderful. So continue sharing those because the reason I pose this question is this is really something that your gut response, the thing that came up for you immediately as silly or as serious or as fun or whatever it was for you, we're going to work on kind of creating a better bond to those instincts. And so keep that in mind as we move along. And so sometimes in general, we sort of fool ourselves into thinking that we all share the same values as those around us. We think that our families, our friends, the people that we kind of gravitate towards, that we assume, oh, we all have things in common. We all share the same values. And I think sometimes we believe that maybe about our political values or the things that, are kind of bigger picture things. But the reality is that each of us has a very unique perspective. There is really nothing that's universal about any of us, right? All of you had kind of different responses, even though there was some commonality. There's very specific things that you really care about that kind of fires up your senses. And I believe that we're certainly shaped by our losses. We are shaped by the things that we grieve, the things that we that we struggle with. But I truly believe that we're really shaped by the experiences we find fulfilling. And that's really what we kind of neglect when it comes to talking about difficult things, is that we're not really spending time considering and thinking about what it is that we love, what it is that we value, what it is that we care about. And so if you do have the luxury of being around those who you all have the same exact values, maybe you've been able to kind of clearly articulate those things. But often, most of us need language. We need words, we need concepts to clearly communicate what it is that we actually care about, right? What is it that our actual values are grounded upon, and what is it that matters to us? Okay, so we're going to do an exercise. I'm going to move us to the next slide. So there's a handout on the event page for today. If you happen to print that out, magnificent. If you want to go to the event page now, feel free. I'm going to have it up here on the screen. And so what we're going to do is I've broken up values into 3 buckets. And this is a very simplistic way to look at this. So forgive me if there's something that doesn't speak to you or if you want to include your own. But I'd like us to walk through values as broken up into 3 buckets here. So our personal values, spiritual values, and cultural values. Okay. So let's consider 5 of these personal values. Integrity, acting with honesty and ethical principles in all situations. Creativity, expressing oneself through artistic endeavors and innovative thinking. Compassion, showing empathy and kindness towards others, especially those in need. Independence, valuing autonomy and self-sufficiency in decision-making and actions. And resilience, persisting in the face of challenges and adversity, bouncing back from setbacks. Let's look now at spiritual values. Faith, belief in a higher power or some sort of spiritual existence that guides one's life. Peace, seeking inner tranquility and harmony within oneself and the universe. Connection, feeling interconnectedness with all living beings in the natural world. Service, finding meaning and purpose in serving others and contributing to the greater good. Forgiveness, letting go of resentment and practicing compassion towards oneself and others. And the last group here, cultural values. Family, placing importance on familiar relationships, loyalty, and support. Tradition, honoring customs, rituals, and practices passed down through generations. Respect, showing deference and consideration for elders, authority figures, and cultural heritage. Community, valuing cooperation, collaboration, and solidarity within one's cultural or ethnic group. And lastly, honor, upholding principles of dignity, pride, and reputation within a cultural context. So what I would like to do is I'm going to leave these up on the screen. And again, if you would rather look at the handout, it is on the event page and you can always go to that afterwards. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave this on the screen and I would like for all of us to spend a few minutes looking at these values. And I'd like for you to jot down or if you don't have anything in front of you, just kind of memorize or think about what it is that sticks out to you most. No one of these values is any better than any of the rest. What it comes down to is what are the ones that stick out to you and what are the ones that kind of define the way you live your day-to-day. Okay, so I want you to reflect on the activities and experiences that you mentioned at the top about fulfillment and satisfaction. There's going to be some linking between that, I believe, with your values. I will set a timer. I'll play some music if it's soothing, if it works right. And I'll bring us all back here momentarily where I'll ask a few questions and ask you to share. right, I'm gonna give folks about 30 more seconds and then we will bring everyone back. Okay. All right. For some, that probably felt very long, and for others, that probably felt very quick. So what I would like to do now is I have a couple prompts here. And before I continue, I see a lot of folks asking for the slides. I can get with the Senior Planet team about posting those to the event page. That's perfectly fine by me if it's fine by them. So what I'd like you to do is, here are a few prompts to consider. I was curious if folks would be willing to share in the chat, what values did you find to be the most essential to you? What were the ones that stuck out to you as being sort of the closely held values that you kind of live your day-to-day life by? And then did you have any values that conflicted with each other? Were there any that in holding both at the same time, sometimes they butt up against each other? An example that comes to mind for me would be independence and family, right? Sometimes those things can butt up against each other. And did you rank your values in any terms of importance or anything like that? Was there anything specifically that helped you sort of determine what it is that was important to you? I'm curious in general if people found this either easy or difficult. If it was it difficult to actually think about what it is you value? Did you find all these words to be like, oh, they all kind of sound nice? Or were you did you see words that really resonated with you and you were able to speak to those? And then the last prompt to consider is, what are the values you want to be remembered by? We're leaving our legacy every day. I think often when we hear the word legacy, we think of things that are far loftier and grandiose. But the life that we live every day is a part of a legacy that we leave. And so of those values, what were the ones that you want to be remembered by? All right, I see some in the chat. Sheila saying family ranked first. Christy saying peace, creativity, and independence. Nancy mentioned finding balance between saving money for children and adventure travel. Yeah, there's some conflict there, right? Creativity, being resourceful and discovering new ways of thinking about things. Deb mentioned, I want to be remembered as a good worker, that she loved to make people laugh and led a clean life. Is that a song? All right. I think we might have time if folks, if there's a couple people who want to raise their hand and we can help them unmute if folks want to share sort of how they were able to determine their values and what are the ones that stuck out to them. And if not, that's okay too. Sheila says, I want to be remembered for being an encourager and for building people up. I like that. Did anyone here find it difficult to identify values? Did all the words kind of seem like they just sort of felt like universal principles? I'm curious if anyone felt that way. Oh, Nancy, I value justice, but I didn't see it listed under the 3 categories. I think that's a good example. There probably are words and concepts that weren't listed. So I think it's important to notice that that's something you value. I think that's great. Barbara said integrity, family, and honor. Also my sense of humor. There you go. There's another one that wasn't in there. Great. Well, thank you all. This is great. I really appreciate you participating. So the goal here is you all may, if I had asked you to write down what you care about, you probably would have been able to put a few things together. And the reason I do this is that if we can all kind of use some terms and concepts that are familiar enough to be able to use when you think and care and talk about what you care about, then it may be a little easier to share those things with people in your circle of trust, the loved ones, family, friends, and so forth. And so I'm curious if folks are willing to indulge me, sort of what are, if I can move my little thing here, I got a lot of little screens pulled up. I want you to reflect on the significance of your values in the context of end-of-life care decisions. I'm curious if anyone has an example here of maybe a value you identified, how you may see that become relevant when it comes to end-of-life care. Maybe for your own, maybe something you've witnessed. The example I often give is when independence is a closely held value, how that can be difficult for people to support a person at end of life. And how do you maintain and support that person's value? So I'm curious if folks want to share in the chat. I'll come off my screen here. Nancy mentioned, I don't want to be a burden to my family or use up savings on end-of-life medical care. I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot. I'm sure a lot of people can identify with that. What about others? What was the question? All right, I'll repeat it. I want you to reflect on sort of the values that we just reflected on and the ones you identified as being kind of closely held to you personally. And in the context of end-of-life care decisions or end-of-life matters, what are the things that come up for you as being relevant? Jenny, I don't want to suffer and linger. Is this about pre or post-death? It's a great question. I think it all matters, based on your context. I think sometimes what people value in their legacy is something that does become relevant and matters after death. So I think it totally depends on how you see this. I don't want to leave a mess for my daughter to clean up. I need to declutter and downsize now. Independence, recognizing, receiving support from experts, professionals, and those who do not find issues challenging or crazy making. Okay. Bob mentioned, in today's couples world, I value simplicity and end-of-life care and death. I've spent 20 years caring for my parents. I don't want my kids to have to do that. Okay, so a lot of what I'm seeing here too, these may have been things that you already felt you kind of closely aligned with, maybe from a lived experience, maybe for a fear or concern of things you want to avoid for the people you care about. And so what I will encourage you to do is when you share those things with people in your life, find ways to articulate it using those values we talked about, right? I really value X, and that's why this matters to me, right? Sometimes people hear these statements, and if they haven't considered end of life, on face value, it's very jarring. People don't often spend a lot of time thinking about end of life unless you're like me. And so think of ways to articulate these things using values, using words that we just reflected on, and using the things that maybe are the things that guide your day-to-day life. They aren't just relevant for your end of life care. They're how you live your day-to-day. Okay. So I want to switch gears because what I'd like to do is I really want us to spend some time looking at advance directives. And I really want us to look at what it is, what's an advance directive. I'm curious, for those that can see the poll results, I don't know if we still have it going, how people answered the poll.
Come off and say it was about a 50-50 split for those who had versus didn't, with a couple of folks who weren't sure.
Okay, great. All right. Well, then this is a pretty representative group then. All right, so what we're gonna do, so exploring your values, I believe, can have a really significant impact on your advanced care planning. What I've alluded to is that often what some people will do is they'll sit down and they'll say, I really should do that. I really should do that. I really should do that. And when they get in front of any kind of advanced care planning, document or form, it's a list of very kind of intense situations one has to consider. And so again, what I really was aiming to do today and why I approach it this way is if you can kind of go in knowing what it is you care about, I believe it's a lot easier to select and communicate your end of life decisions. And so for those that are unacquainted, an advanced care plan is a comprehensive living will and comfort directive for your healthcare, comfort care, and for many people after death wishes. I know one person referenced, should that be included? A lot of people do include that, okay? In my humble opinion, every adult should have an advanced care plan. Every adult. Okay. I find obviously that as we age, we become more interested, we've had more life experience and seen more scenarios, but in general, everyone should have this type of documentation. Discussing and deciding on your goals of care and choosing a decision maker, it's critical. Someone who understands your preferences, your values, your goals, that, in my opinion, requires a certain clarity on your own values. Right? And that's sometimes the hardest part. It's why we spent so much time on it today. Language is very important. And assuming that the people in your life will just kind of get it, that's where sometimes things get murky and where decision-making becomes very difficult. And I believe sometimes our intentions and desires kind of get lost without the language we're seeking. So I'm going to take us through a few more slides here. We're going to break it down. And some of you who have an advance directive, you may still get lost in some of this language. So take heart. It's not purposely confusing. It's just, it can be confusing. So I mentioned earlier, every adult should have an advance directive. Okay. An advance directive is a legal document that allows you to plan and make your own end of life wishes known in the event you lack capacity or can't communicate. Capacity is really referring to soundness of mind. This is something determined by a physician, okay? Sometimes I get people, I think, who are joking, who ask, if I complete this and I pick my daughter, are they the one that gets to determine I am not sound of mind? No, this is something that a medical professional has to determine, that you lack capacity. Okay, and it also is important to know that this takes effect when that happens, not at the moment you complete a document, okay? So advance directive, you see here on your screen, it's two components. So a living will, and that word will sometimes trips people up. This is a living will. These are medical interventions, procedures, and so forth that you do or do not want to happen to you while you are living, okay? And again, this is not, if you are unable to communicate, completing a document like this is trying to basically give you a voice when you don't have one. All right, that's really the aim. That's the goal of this. It's so that you have a chance to make a decision for yourself when you are not able to do so. Okay. The other piece of this is the most important and is the most challenging is the appointment of a healthcare agent. There's a lot of synonyms for healthcare agent. I've listed some of them on the screen. You may have heard these terms: healthcare proxy, healthcare surrogate, durable power of attorney for healthcare. That one's a mouthful. Medical power of attorney, healthcare representative, healthcare attorney, in fact, those are all synonyms. Depending on your state and when your state decided to finalize their state advance directive, there's a lot of factors there. It kind of dictates what term they use. So I like to say decision maker because it's a little more clear what we're talking about, okay? So again, an advance directive is a written statement of your wishes, preferences, and choices regarding those end-of-life healthcare decisions. And so unless otherwise specified in an advance directive, that document goes into effect once a physician has determined you lack capacity or cannot communicate. And it's important to know that an advance directive is for healthcare. It's not about your assets, and it's not about assigning financial responsibility. Those are different documents. All right. This is about what happens to you in case of a medical emergency or sudden serious illness. Right. Selecting a decision maker often rather, you really need that clear communication within a family system, among loved ones. If folks are willing to share in the chat, I'm sure we can think of kind of two scenarios. One where appointing a decision maker was critical to that person's end of life care decisions being made in accordance with what they wanted. And in the absence of a decision maker, how confusing and fraught and frustrating it was for the people who cared about that individual. All right. So I often say, in a contentious situation, it's really important. What I find is it's especially important in a situation where everyone thinks that they all have the same values and everyone cares about the same things. All right. Having that decision maker is critical. So I have a few things to consider when trying to decide who your decision maker should be. I'm going to come off screen so you're not just looking at my slides. So when you're selecting a decision maker, there's a few scenarios that I think folks might want to consider. They might apply to you. They might apply to someone that you care about. And while I do think everyone should complete one, these are some scenarios where you can think, oh, wow, this is when it's really especially important. For those who are solo aging, that's a new term for you, solo aging. This applies to a few folks. Sometimes it applies to someone who's never married or whose family and loved ones and maybe a spouse have all passed away. They've survived siblings and so forth. Solo aging can apply to a lot of different situations. So this is especially important to be able to appoint a friend or person you trust to carry out your values or wishes, right? In the absence of an advance directive, if it's not clear, that can become really fraught. Another scenario, if you are not married or related to the person you want making your decisions, right? There's a lot of scenarios in which that might be the case. It might, and I'll give another scenario here in a minute, but if you are not married or related to the person you want making your decisions, especially if you're in a long-term friendship, romantic partnership, what have you, that is critical, right? In the absence of an advance directive, depending on the state you live in, they typically look at next of kin, right? So that might be a scenario in which having that decision maker selected is critical for you. The other scenario, if you, I always chuckle a little bit, it's not funny. If you do not want someone who are married to or related to making your decisions, that's another scenario where having that decision maker appointed might be really critical for you. Okay. Sometimes that means the person that you're married to or your next of kin, you don't like the idea of that sort of decision-making power being placed at their feet, right? It totally depends on everyone's scenario is a little different. And then sometimes it's just a difference in values, right? So the person you should select should really know and understand, going back to that word again, your values, your wishes, your fears, right? That's really important. I think sometimes we do hear people talk about their fears sometimes. That maybe is a little more forthcoming, but coming back to those values is key. Someone who's willing to handle a stressful situation. Often these advance directives come into play with unexpected events, right? And someone who's able to tell doctors what type of care you prefer and what you do not want. So ask yourself, because also, this is probably not something you will decide in one sitting. It might take a couple of kind of considerations to land on someone. Do I trust this person to be able to make tough decisions? Will this person honor my wishes, even if he or she does not agree with my wishes? All right, going back to that values. Do they have kind of different values for their own care, but can they carry out what I want, independent of what they want for themselves? Can this person stand up for me even if family members or others disagree? If you are appointed the decision maker, you are making it legal for that person to make your decisions for you. And so can they kind of make others in the situation understand, you've been appointed and that's what you've been asked to do. And the last, is this person likely to be available in case of an emergency? So this is kind of a little more vague, but basically, if the person that you want making your decisions doesn't live in the same state, can they be reached? Can they be contacted? Can they travel? Kind of a more logistical question. Okay. And so I want to make sure I reiterate it again. For an advance directive for healthcare, your decision maker in this context cannot make legal financial decisions unless you've given them that power through a whole different document. There's a whole different document for that whole different process. All right. So I just want to make sure people understand that. Sometimes people do make that person sort of their trusted individual for all types of matters. But I don't want people to think that that sort of applies across the board, for better or for worse, right? Some people only want someone making their healthcare decisions and want them to have no other influence otherwise. Okay, so let's recap real quickly so we can make time for Q&A. Okay, so who should complete an advance directive? Anyone over the 18 years or older. The motivation being that life is unpredictable. All right, we sometimes associate these things with having lived a long, long, long life. And that's really a privilege that a lot of us seek. But it's really critical that anyone under the age or over the age of 18. When should you complete one? Well, what I always say is before you need one, right? I mean, that's easier said than done. But really the key is when you're able to have and sort of the luxury to consider your options carefully, you can always change an advance directive. You can always change it. You can always update it. As long as you have not been deemed to lack capacity, you can always update your advance directive. You're never too healthy to talk about it, right? Which form should you complete? You really should complete the form for that was created for your state. And there's a few places you can go. I will give you a website on the next slide where it's kind of a catch-all, but your local hospitals, hospice organizations, public health, state bar, your state aging offices, they're all going to provide your state-specific form. Okay. And then I want to make sure people understand you do not need a lawyer to complete an advance directive. Sometimes when the term legal and will and attorney are thrown around, it starts to become a little confusing. You do not need a lawyer to complete an advance directive. Some states do give you the option to have it notarized. And in that situation, I encourage people to have it notarized. In the state of Tennessee, where I'm located, instead of having it notarized, you can have your advance directive witnessed by 2 adults. And so a lot of states are like that. All right, so here's a typical form. They like to cram a lot of questions in a small amount of space. But this is typically, oh, you know what? It would help if I had my screen shared. Bear with me for a minute. I got to talking and got caught up. So this is a typical advance directive form. You may have seen this. And just make sure it's the one for your state. And this is where you determine some of your wishes for quality of life, wishes for treatment, and this is where you determine your decision maker. Okay. There are 3 little, well, I guess it's 4 little lines at the top of this page where you can include other instructions. We could probably spend hours talking about all the other decisions and choice points we have at end of life and after death. And so a lot of people will add an addendum and sort of as things come up for them, they'll include other instructions. And so I highly encourage you to do the same. If you want a quick website for reference, caringinfo.org. It's a good resource. They're going to have the state-specific form for each state and give you some insights about anything you should know about that state. I already saw a couple of questions about what happens if you don't have an advance directive. The vague answer is next of kin, but it totally depends on your state. Every state's different. Sometimes states need consensus. So look at that and understand what is relevant for your state. And that form, the advance directive form, that is a state-specific form. It really is the bare minimum, but I really encourage people, a simple plan is better than no plan at all. Having something in place is critical, but you can go beyond that. So here's some other resources. 5 Wishes is a really great resource that addresses the personal, emotional, and spiritual concerns kind of alongside those medical preferences. The Conversation Project is a great resource. They have this like What Matters to Me workbook. It's sort of like a much deeper look at what we did with the values exercise. So instead of just focusing on sort of these worst case scenarios, taking a step back and thinking about what it is that matters to you. And they've got a great conversation starter guide and so forth. Check out your local nonprofit hospice. They will usually have a resource. The one here in Nashville, Alive Hospice, if you want, you can go to that one. They're great. And just make sure that if you're completing the form that it is for your state. And then when in doubt, you could always contact a death doula, of course, if you're looking for assistance. All right. That is all I have. That is all I have. I think now we've got some time for questions. So thank you all for your participation. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you so much, Bre. Yeah, you know what? We do have a lot of questions that have come into the chat room. So I'm going to kind of scroll back and start from the beginning after the ones we've already addressed. So Deb says, trying to get my mother to get this done. It's like pulling teeth. She is 83 and has chosen me, yet she has not had me fill anything out. So how does one get through to family about how important this is?
That's a good question, because the fact that she's made a decision maker who is you, that's pretty important. Sometimes a third party is all it needs. I mean, you might have someone who she also respects who maybe, I know some people who do go to a lawyer to complete these just because sometimes people do respect sort of that legally binding sort of, I don't know, setting. But yeah, I think you've already crossed the threshold of that she's selected you, which I think is the most important part. So getting it in writing, I think that's key. I'm curious if other people have suggestions of what's worked in their family systems. I'm still working on my parents, so I'll let you know.
And then there was a question related to a healthcare agent. How can your healthcare agent function if they are not also your financial POA?
So your healthcare agent is communicating to the medical professionals what you want and what you don't want. If you wanted them to make financial decisions for you, you would need to complete a different document. So some people make that person the same for their financial power of attorney and so forth. So I don't know if that answers your question, but basically you're empowering that healthcare agent to simply say, nope, I have in this document that so-and-so did not want to have infections treated after they've reached this state of mind. So it's very specific, but it's also entrusting them with things like what mattered to you in terms of burial. So being able to tell the family, no, what this person wanted most was to be cremated. They did not want to be buried at X. And so you're really empowering them to assert your decisions.
Okay, excellent. And then let's see. S. Goldstein says, if a person is the only one available for the parent, no other children or family, is that person automatically the decision maker?
What was the first part? If who is already?
If a person is the only one available for, and then it reads the parent, no other children or family, is that person automatically the decision maker?
I hate to give a specific answer because it depends on every state. In general, medical professionals are looking for next of kin, but they're really looking for someone who knew the person. So I do not envy being a physician in the situation between family who maybe was not in touch with that family member who is showing up trying to decide what that person wants or needs, and then maybe a friend who's local and knows them well. It's going to depend on the state, and keep in mind a physician wants to protect their liability, so they're going to follow whatever that state says that they're supposed to do. The general thing is next of kin is what's looked for, and then I know in the state of Tennessee, if they cannot find anyone, they will try to find another adult who was friends with that person, who knew that person. They will try to find someone who can make those decisions. And then there are some scenarios where when no one can be found, it's a tough decision for physicians, and every scenario is going to look a little different, determining what is needed and what sort of how they try to best support someone and make those decisions when there isn't any information.
Another good question for you, Bre, would be, does a doula offer a decision-making service so that it is someone separate from family and friends And somebody else was asking if you have an office in Dallas, in the Dallas.
Oh, so I would say every doula will approach it differently. I would say a lot of them probably do not make themselves, if I'm understanding the question, make like, oh, you can appoint a doula as your decision maker. Often, if you already have like a relationship with that person, sure, I'm sure there's doulas out there who would be willing to be appointed. But generally, it's not just like a service offered without kind of knowing that individual and talking to them and getting to know what it is that they're wanting. And no, I'm from Dallas. My family is all from Kaufman. But no, I am just independent. I'm in Nashville, but definitely wherever you're located, look for deaf doulas in your community. They're all over the country, all over the world. And I know there's some in Dallas.
Excellent. And so a couple of people were asking about the forms. Is there a place where they can find all the forms that you spoke of on that last screen?
Yeah, so keep the term, write down the term Advance Directive for Healthcare. Advance Directive for Healthcare. But hearinginfo.org was the place I recommend just because it's relevant for every state. If you go there, they're going to have your state specific form. But the other resources I mentioned, just don't take me for face value. Your local hospitals, especially if you have like a research university, they're going to have your state specific form. If you go to those places, their websites, you should be able to find it by trying to search for Advance Directive.
Advanced Directive. Okay. All right, so there's one question here. I see, what should be done when a trustworthy family, when a trustworthy family member is unavailable or is not worth trusting if they exist?
Well, I should have mentioned, generally, most Advance Directive forms, you're going to have an alternate. So I'm not sure this is what this person is asking, but usually you can appoint 2 people. And this is especially critical if maybe your decision maker is someone you spend a lot of time with, and heaven forbid something happened to the 2 of you, you'd want to have someone else. But in terms of determining who the person is, I encourage people to have really open, frank conversations. I know in my family system, people do not love the conversation. But you'd be surprised if you're willing to broach that tough conversation, what kind of comes out. If you can create a little bit of tolerance for discomfort and some unease to come up, it's amazing sort of, how little people know about the implications of not having someone just appointed otherwise. So I don't know if I answered that person's question. But yeah, it's tricky. I don't have a specific path. I think in general, being open with the person you want to appoint and not keeping a secret, especially if you have multiple children or multiple cousins, whatever your system looks like, making sure everyone knows who you've chosen.
And I'm not sure if you already mentioned or talked about this, but what if there's no one including next of kin to be the decision maker?
Say that one more time. I'm not following.
What if there is no one including next of kin to be the decision maker?
So going back, so that's when medical providers will try to find someone else who knows you, spent time with you, may be able to speak on your behalf. In those situations, they have their own sort of policies, hospital systems, and states on what you're then supposed to do. And so sometimes people end up having and receiving medical care and treatments that if they had written them down, they wouldn't have received otherwise. So I know it's kind of vague, but it's tricky. People end up receiving a lot of care when they may have not wanted it or they may have not chosen that way. And so medical providers, they'll continue to try to get in touch with someone. But generally they are consulting with one another about what is the most compassionate thing to do for this person. And, what does it look like? Kind of how do we now decide? And sometimes medical professionals are people. They don't have the same values. They may not have the same values as you would have had.
Okay, and then here's another question. I'm looking at green burial as an option. I'm wondering, as a death doula, do you professionally work with the green burial process?
Yes. So I specifically do because I too really value. green burial. If you're not familiar with the term, I encourage you to Google it. It's kind of a return to burial practices before the Civil War, and there's a lot to it. But yeah, a lot of doulas try to help advocate for people to have green burial as an option. There's nothing wrong with conventional ways that people go about death and burial and so forth, but some people want to have options that are not readily available. And sometimes it does require a little bit of education to maybe a funeral director or to, oh, I just got a thumbs down. I don't know how that happened. So maybe it does require a little bit of education, and that's where a death doula can come in. They can kind of help you understand. They can save you a little bit of time. Sometimes they know the people to work with and who to go to. And yeah, so long answer for yes.
Okay. And I lost the other question that I was about to. So when we were talking about healthcare proxy, somebody asked what kind of financial expenses are commonly related to being a healthcare proxy?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say it has more to do with if the person has appointed or has determined sort of what kind of care they want. One thing to consider is that if you are appointed as a trusted decision maker, you might ask if that person has someone set up on their bank accounts as there's a couple terms. One is called payable on death, which truly does not come into play until that person has died. So say you've told someone, hey, it really is important to me that I'm cremated. If they don't have someone on their bank account as payable on death, it could be a little tricky making sure those things are paid for. And so you as a healthcare decision maker, you might ask those questions just to make sure the person has thought about it. And then as it becomes relevant or is needed, sometimes people choose to appoint someone as a financial power of attorney. And that is when you can use that person's money legally to help pay for care and costs and so forth. It's a really long way of saying your healthcare decision maker is just communicating to your doctor, to loved ones, to that circle of trust, what it is that you wanted. I know that there's always a financial implication. There always is a financial implication, but there's not anything kind of included in that form that gives that person responsibility over finances. So usually you have to do something outside of that form.
And somebody asked a simple question, can't you have a living will without an appointed person?
You can. I don't know. It probably depends on your state if it's considered complete. I know in Tennessee, you can have a separate form that's just for the decision maker. Often when you go to file that advance directive form with a PCP, with your physician, they're going to want it complete in some way. So it depends on your state. If it is separate, then yeah, you would be able to kind of communicate your wishes to your medical provider, and that way they know. And so if they, going back to those scenarios earlier, if there's not someone appointed, you've communicated clearly what it is that you want.
And can doulas be the proxy and the POA? Someone is asking.
I don't want to speak on behalf of all doulas, but yeah, doulas are people. And so if you've forged a relationship with someone where, and they're a doula and you've entrusted that person, yes, I would say a lot of doulas probably have some boundaries around this because they're really trying to empower people to look to their community and forge connections where they might not otherwise exist. So not every doula is the same, but yeah, maybe if you have a trusted relationship, then maybe that would make sense. But doulas are generally doing this work as a business, and so that can get a little tricky if you're payable on death. So just consider that as a boundary. But yeah, definitely something that they would help you determine.
Okay. All right, great. I guess we have just time for one more question. POD is the same as having a beneficiary on a bank financial account. Is that correct?
Yes and no. Sometimes the terms are interchangeable depending on the financial institution, and sometimes it just means that, like if you have a bank account, sometimes you're not really appointing a beneficiary. You're not going to see that term. You would appoint a POD. So keep those terms in mind. Go institution by, if you bank here, you have investments there. Just make sure that whatever it is that you need for that institution, that those terms, that you've got those things covered.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Bree. Let's give Bree a round of applause, everybody. Thank you so much. Great. You'll see in the chat room that there's people saying lots of great information. Thank you so much. Deidre also put the slides that Bree was presenting. Many people were asking, so those are available in the chat room. And if we didn't get to any of your questions, or if you have any lingering questions, remember we're going to have a follow-up session this coming Wednesday during our Lunch and Learn Wellness Wednesday. And actually, Bree will be in attendance and you're speaking on this behalf. So thank you so much, Bree, for everything.